and flashes of color and excitement. And invariably, you know, just given the sheer number of events in the music and in the player experience, there will be these collisions. It's no different than when you're sitting in your car in traffic and you suddenly realize that, you know, the radio is in sync with your turn signal. And it's like, my God, I am like one with the universe. It's like, well, you know, when there's 10 million turn signal moments per day and there's 10 million radio stations, it's gonna happen. Like, rare events are not rare. And it's the same with games. You can just put little splashes in and sometimes have a completely linear piece of music, and it will create the impression, because the player will at some point do something when one of those things is happening, and they will feel that they did that. Now, I'm not saying that's all that's not interactive, but you can get away with perceiving to be interactive in some situations. And so those are cases where it becomes a very interesting psychological kind of case study. But that said, none of which is what Erica is about. So Erica is a thriller. It is often sort of brought up, ironically, we started on it long before anybody had any notion of what Bandersnatch would be, but they are often brought up in the same breath. And my estimation is that Bandersnatch is basically an interactive film, whereas Erica is a filmed game. So it's like, if it's a coin, I would put Erica very much on the game side, but using the tricks of film trade, as it were. It's filmed like a movie, it thinks like a movie from a cinematic standpoint, but it is definitely a game. And a pretty sophisticated one in terms of branching narratives. I mean, there's just millions of variables that the game is keeping track of, and it'll be like, do you want to pick up this phone or that water bottle? And then there will be consequences for that you can't fully comprehend for the next hour. It's like life. So it's a thriller about a young woman who had this traumatic event growing up where she found her father's murdered body, and now as a young 20-something, a hand gets mailed to her that the police think is somehow connected to the unsolved case of her father, and then sort of it pulls her into this creepy, almost like Da Vinci Code-esque underworld of just sunshine and rainbows, as you would guess. And it plays out like a film, but you're controlling dialogue and you know, making plot decisions, I guess you could call them. You know, door number 1 versus door number 2 kind of stuff throughout. And so it's like, it plays like a feature film, but there's like 5 or 6 hours worth of footage so that it can really go different places.
Great, let's take a look at Erica.
music and upbeat experiences, as you can tell.
Now, what's the implementation like for you on this? There's a lot of interactivity.
Yeah, it almost killed me. Honestly, it was the hardest score I've ever had to write in that regard, because it was like something in the neighborhood of 350 cues spanning not even 90 minutes of music, I think. I mean, it's just this elaborate, it's like, the analogy I've come up with is that it's sort of like a chain link fence where every cue is touching every other cue in all directions. So there's definitely no, I mean, there is a linearity to it of sorts, but everything had to be built to be so nimble, because I think gamers in general let composers like us off the hook too easily, because we have gotten accustomed to the technological limitations that games had for so long, codified certain practices where you're in a dialogue scene and, you know, it's like a BioWare game where you go through all your options and then you can say, okay, now let's go. And there's some music looping along and then you say, let's go, and it just cuts and jumps into whatever's next. And it's like, that's just such shitty storytelling. And for the longest time, it was that way because there was no way to do anything different than that. Now we can definitely be way more polished than that, but gamers, they don't demand it. So I think there's an easy complacency on our part. The thing is, this does not feel like a video game. It feels a hell of a lot like a movie. And so there is no hiding any of that stuff. And so, and plus the nuance, and they have this Holly Earl, this great performer carrying this thing, who plays Erica. And so, you know, you have a dialogue choice, and then she'll give a look. Someone will say, well, you know, I'm making a line up, but they'll say, you know, well, what time was it when you opened your door? And she'll look over at somebody, and it's like, that look, if you were scoring that as a film, you'd want to play off that look. And it's like, but I have no idea when that look is going to happen, because the player has, you know, finite but range of times in which to make these certain choices, and so everything has to have this flexibility to react to really, really minute things that games normally don't care about. Now, my opinion is games should actually care about those things, but this one, there was no option to even pretend that it didn't matter. So as a result, every cue it had to be looking no greater than 2 or 3 seconds down the road, if sometimes less. It was crazy. I'm still kind of recovering, I think.
Now, I won't ask about the timeline for doing these different projects, but I do want to touch on, before we drag Walter and John into the conversation, I just want to get a quick look at this week's latest announcement and release. Maybe one of the...
My dignity, about to disappear.
We know where you've spent your life for the last few years here between these projects. Let's look at John Wick Hex. Thanks, Chandler.
All this talk of bloody noses and everything, and Erica Chandler's.
Mr. Wintory, we have a contract for you. Can you provide support?
Mike Biffle, acclaimed creator of Thomas Was Alone? What do you think about it? Yes, I can.
was very, I don't know how it sounded to you, there's so much slap back in this room that it was like there was a delay added to the entire track, and the whole thing was very weird and kind of interesting, possibly.
Now, Austin, with this project, Sean, with your projects, Walter, with yours, you're sometimes building on existing franchises, and I'm wondering what that's like. How do you make things feel personal when you're jumping into something where, in Austin's case, we've got the John Wick films we're really familiar with, and with Walter, you've worked on the Killzone, you've worked on Total Warhammer games, a little bit of Grand Theft Auto, but your latest is Call of Duty Mobile. That's kind of an existing franchise, and I'm just wondering, what's that like when you have to dive into something that's so beloved by your fans?
There's always this expectation of, the fan base, which is us players, then the game directors, the audio leads, the entire team, and everyone has a different opinion of what the music is supposed to sound like. And then, of course, you want to do the best and, do something different. In my case, for instance, I came up with the instrumentation and said, okay, I want to use lots of electronics, keep it a hybrid score, but have lots of kind of solo cello, or just played it differently. For instance, I used a solo cellist, Peter Gregson, who did lots of feedback. Goes on further.
That's your friend.
So Peter Gregson, for instance, who worked on the Harry Gregson film, from composer Harry Gregson, those films including Wonder Woman and Hacksaw Ridge. So he's a very cool guy who can, play the instrument slightly different. Ask him to play the cello with the bow on the wooden side instead of the horsehair. I then bought myself a very cheap cello off eBay, which I destroyed it throughout the course of scoring the game.
Isn't that what all composers do? They just find cheap instruments wherever on the side of the street. I post online when I see pianos because I know you all want to just brutalize them.
Yeah. Just trying to find something that's new and different, or kind of unique to the franchise.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this a lot for Call of Duty. I mean, there is one mission in there which hasn't dropped yet, but it's been announced. It's the zombies, and in zombies you're gonna experience a totally different kind of setting. Of course, it's gruesome, it's dark, it's dirty, there's a lot of blood in there, and zombies, as you expect. So the music had to reflect that. And instead of going to air and record 60, 70, 80 piece orchestra, I decided to just record a few instruments and give them all the time to really shape